Welcome back to Transcriber from Reddit. Today's post will be the first post for my Transcriber from Facebook series, starting today. And the reason for that is because my topic today comes from a Facebook post from the WELSDiscussions Facebook group. The reason that I'm making a whole separate category is because it's not originally a Reddit post. It is a Facebook post. I will link to the original Facebook post in the comments down below, and I will include the screenshots that were sent to me as part of the video itself while I read it. It is a public, viewable Facebook discussion group, so I will include the name of the person who did the original post, as well as the names of people who comment to this post. Let's begin. The post was made by Luke, middle initial I, Tembriul, spelled T-E-M as in Mary, B as in boy, R-E-U-L-L, and it was posted 3 days ago, or on January 2nd. The post reads as follows: Reddit rumors and Facebook courtrooms. Every year or two, someone comes across a shockingly disturbing account of wickedness in the Wells. These accounts also describe how this wrongdoing was mishandled by the leaders of the institution involved, sometimes by the synod itself. These accounts are used by those who hate the synod for one reason or another. Parentheses, perhaps valid, perhaps not, and parentheses, to paint with a broad brush and slander the leadership of the Wells, pastors, teachers, and members in the court of public opinion. These accounts are then shared and trouble many. I have been included in those troubled by them. However, it is nearly impossible to properly respond to them. I hope to share some guidance to help, comfort, and encourage those who read these things. First, remember that your faith is not in Wells. You do not believe in Wells. You are not saved by Wells, parentheses, or ELS for that matter. Side note, ELS stands for Evangelical Lutheran Synod, end parentheses. When you were confirmed, you did not swear to be faithful to Wells. When your pastor was ordained and installed, he did not promise to hold on to the Wells. Your faith is in Christ. Your faith is in His Word. He has saved you. He has baptized you. He has forgiven you. He will carry your soul in faith to heaven. Trust not in princes, in mortal men who cannot save. Trust in Christ. Listen to His Word. Paul told Timothy to watch his life and doctrine carefully. This is what you should expect from your pastor and your congregation, parentheses, and by extension, the Wells, end parentheses. We as a synod, in quotations, walk together, end quotations, because we agree in doctrine and practice, parentheses. That is, we agree in how our faith should be lived, end parentheses. Congregations are members of the Wells. You are members of a Wells congregation. It is useful to remember that. You cannot know what every Wells congregation or every Wells school or every Wells institution does, but you do know your brothers and sisters in your own congregation. You can see what your church is teaching and doing. If your congregation, your circuit, your district, parentheses, as far as you can tell, end parentheses, is teaching the true faith and living the true faith, then how can you let something someone wrote on the internet shake you? Second, the church is full of sinners. The visible church on earth may even be full of hypocrites, the weeds among the wheat. Jesus says this. Jesus knows this. Jesus has already pronounced His judgment on those who cause His little ones to fall. As sinners, your pastors and your leaders will make mistakes. Often, they are required to make a judgment on a situation. They try to give godly guidance, but they are sinners, and sinners err. For a time, parentheses, and I don't think we are out of that time yet, in parentheses, our churches could be naive and self-righteous. Bad things happen out there. Bad things could never happen here. We have in the past underestimated the power of temptation. Men who should have done better have fallen into grievous sins because they overestimated their will and didn't take steps to defend their own hearts. We, as brothers and sisters in Christ, are trusting. For a long time, predators have taken advantage of churches so that they can have easy access to their prey. Out of ignorance, or worse, laziness, some institutions have not taken the steps needed to protect the vulnerable and remove the temptation to sin from people in positions of authority. Often, leaders of organizations think first of protecting the institution rather than defending and healing the innocent. We cannot make excuses for sin. This reality does not minimize the pain that sin causes. However, whenever we hear about sin, even in the church, we are sad, but we are not surprised. Judas was a disciple of Jesus. Peter saw the glory of God. They each fell in times of salvation. Their sin didn't invalidate Christ's work. No sinner can invalidate Christ's work. Even when we see sin in the church, do not let that shake your faith. Wherever non-related adults are interacting with children, especially if a child could be alone with an adult, children are at risk. Wherever men and women are in close contact with one another, temptations will arise. We can see this in every place across our society: Hollywood, workplaces, Boy Scouts, schools, both public and private, summer camps, and churches. That bad things happen in the world is not an excuse for bad things to happen among us. I do not think the WELS has a bigger problem, parentheses, in fact, it is quite rare, end parentheses, than any other institution. However, we are concerned for any soul hurt by abusive behavior. If you have been hurt by someone at one of our churches, I am sorry. God is with you. May He grant you healing. I know, parentheses, I have been through training and worked hard to implement protections in my own ministries, and parentheses, that the WELS has been and is working hard to prevent these things from happening. I encourage anyone who hears these things, or even those who are survivors, to go to freedomforcaptives.com and see the work being done there. May God give us strength to do what is needed and wisdom to recognize the problems. Third, these posts are almost all essentially gossip and slander. Gossip isn't necessarily false. Slander hides in the gray areas. Often these accounts tell one side of a story in the most unfavorable way. Sometimes they are written by a person who themselves, quote, heard about it, end quote. When they are shared on the internet, they are seen and spread by people who do not know the situation and have, these next two words are in all caps, no way of verifying its truth and no power or responsibility to do something about it. Even first-hand accounts of how bad the WELS is may not be true. For example, one of my friends in high school came out as gay a few years after graduation. A number of his closest friends, concerned for his soul, reacted badly. He wrote on a similar message board a horror story of his high school experience. It was divorced from reality. He had lots of friends. His friends loved him and cared for him. He was supported in his activities. He was welcomed everywhere. He was a good Christian young man. His story shared none of that. I am not saying that all these accounts are similarly false. However, if you read them, how can you know? Sometimes they are anonymous both in the telling and in the events. They say this bad thing happened at a church by a teacher/pastor, and no one did anything about it. This is completely unverifiable and then used to describe over 1,000 churches and hundreds of thousands of Christians. Sometimes they are horror stories of high school. And even though I know that the present can cloud the past, I tend to believe that bad things happen in our high schools. Have you ever been to a high school? Have you ever met a group of teenage boys? Have you ever heard what teenage girls will say to each other? Teenagers are struggling to mature. They do stupid things, bad things, and high school administrators are tasked with doing their best to guide them with law and gospel. This isn't easy. There isn't a right answer in some cases. Sometimes teens assume that the adults know, parentheses, or sometimes they assume the adults don't know, end parentheses, and so discipline seems arbitrary, unfair, or selective. This is usually not the case. It is worth reading Luther's explanation to the 8th commandment in the Small Catechism again. Begin quotations. Take your neighbor's words and actions in the kindest possible way. End quotations. These stories almost always do the exact opposite of this. While we do not look for ways to make sin less sinful, we cannot assume anyone's motivations. He comes from a Wells family. She was on varsity. You do not know why someone chose to act or respond like he did. To assume motivations is to claim to know the heart. It is also worth reading Luther's large catechism on the 8th commandment. In that section, he speaks at length about how we deal with our neighbors when before the authorities. God has appointed judges. They listen to evidence and they judge according to laws in place. God has appointed leaders in our synod. We have boards of appeals. They hear difficult cases to protect our called workers. The responsibility to decide tough cases rests on them. It does not ever rest on you. We should be thankful that they don't tell us why they made their decisions. This is to protect the privacy of all involved. From the outside, it may often seem like they acted wrongly, and maybe they did. Those 3 words are in all caps. But that is between them and the Lord, not between them and you. I will assume you are a member of a congregation. Your congregation elects elders and church leaders. Your congregation has policies. Your district elects leaders. If you are concerned for how these decisions are made, this is where you look. Make sure men of good faith and solid conscience are in these positions. Encourage your pastor to be involved. Encourage your leaders to make hard decisions for what is right. A Reddit page was shared on here which inspired my little diatribe. I know and can know nothing of its veracity. I am not, nor will I be in any position to investigate nor do anything about it, but I have a little response. It is possible that all the descriptions and the innuendo are true. It is possible that the person acted completely inappropriately and, quote, got away with it, end quote. I will not call the poster a liar. She, parentheses, I think it is a she, end parentheses, seems sincerely concerned and struggled to know where to take her concerns, although it seems like it is something she heard and not something she witnessed. However, the account doesn't add up to me. It lacks a coherent timeline. It is missing important details. Things are assumed. If the underlying facts are correct, then it seems likely the person at best acted unwisely. Parentheses, though without knowing more, perhaps this person did the best with the situation and sought help and guidance along the way. Again, missing details make for bad judgments. End parentheses. If the facts are incorrect, or if other facts are left out, then we can't say much of anything one way or the other. I am happy to discuss this in private. Jing Chen, and for context, that was the poster of the Reddit post on Women Are Prey in the Wells, previously on WELSDiscussions. Feel free to PM, parentheses, however, please comment below that you are planning to, or else I won't check my requests, end parentheses. Finally, This page was partially started because of a poorly handled situation involving a called worker. So I know they are not going to try to stop people from raising their concerns, parentheses, nor do we want to censor content, end parentheses. However, in that situation, it was already very public, and most of the people bringing it up had direct knowledge and ways of verifying what was being said and done. Random people on the internet bringing the private into the most public places should not be rewarded for their sin. I wonder if the admins should remove the post, though by turning off commenting, it will swiftly drift away to obscurity. If the admins want more of my opinion and to discuss the wisest course of action, they know how to contact me. Peace to all of you. So ends the Facebook post. Now let's turn to the comments section. The author, again Luke Trembreu, says, Teal Deer. For my listeners, that's TL:DR dash. Stay out of the cesspools of slander and be diligent in your own vocations wherever God has placed you. Daniel Baker, an admin of this Facebook group, comments, FWIW, which is short for what it's worth. Comments were turned off as soon as I saw that thread, and the OP is no longer a member of this group. Luke Tremble responds to Daniel Baker's comment, I assume the OP is not a member because of his name calling elsewhere. And yes, I saw that the post was almost immediately shut down. I wish I had a good best way to deal with things like that. Sometimes we need to have a legitimate discussion, but sometimes it seems like we open things up to be a platform for slander. Also, I wish the OP could have had the discussion about how challenging situations are handled, assuming he wanted a real discussion. Daniel Baker responds to Luke Tremble's response, saying, looking through that subreddit, parentheses, which I do not recommend, since even I found it disturbing, end parentheses, the modus operandi seems to be guilty until proven innocent, parentheses, and even then likely still guilty, end parentheses. I don't find such things particularly helpful. You are correct that there is a difference between a legitimate discussion of things that have been brought forward publicly, parentheses, preferably through the legal system, end parentheses, and anonymous accusations bereft of detail or from third parties that seem intent on smearing the institution because of modern ideologies or whatever. Wow! This post is one of those posts where you take a look at it and realize there are so many things to address that it's hard to figure out where to start. If I were to have a teal deer of this situation, it would read as follows. Keep bringing up these situations regardless of abuse involved, whether it's abuse of power, sexual abuse, sexual harassment, sexual misconduct, abuse of children, abuse of authority. This entire thread demonstrates why these situations need to continue to be brought up and discussed. Before I begin my dissection of the main post, I shall dissect the comments, starting with Luke Trimble's first comment. Slander is not slander if the person's actions have evidence for them, regardless if it's by word of mouth, legal, or based off of personal interactions, i.e., he was caught in the act by somebody. That's not slander, that is facts, that is evidence. And that is also being diligent in our own vocations, which is something that you want all of us to do, which I do applaud. Yes, we should be diligent, and we will be diligent by sharing these stories with each other. Next comment I'm going to address is the one by Daniel Baker. Besides being a commenter, he's also an admin for this Facebook group. Saying that the comments were turned off as soon as you saw it could mean any number of things. I'm going to guess favorably towards you that you turned off comments because you saw it as being slander and against the 8th commandment. That's okay. For people who would like to continue to comment on this situation as well as give us more details, because if you wanted to give more details on the original post, you couldn't on the Facebook group because the admin turned the commenting off. But you can give us more details over at the Reddit post on subreddit xLutheran. Note, the author of the comment also said that OP is no longer a member of this group. I wonder why that is. Was he removed? Did he remove himself? OP, if you are listening to this, if you have any details on it, please, by all means, send them to me. Next comment is Luke's response to Daniel Baker. When Luke says, I assume the OP is not a member because of his name calling elsewhere, I have to admit I looked through the posts using the find search option that Facebook gives you for searching within a group, and I searched OP's name. There were 2 comments for certain that I could find, and I don't know that any of his previous comments were not removed for certain. But the 2 comments that I did find, they were not bullying in any way, shape, or form. I will include them in the video here. One is where he says, mine is keeping my children away from WELS so they don't get molested. And the other one says, Jesus, please save us from the homosexual agenda. Amen. You can argue over whether or not they're nice for what was intended for a discussion, but they are definitely not name-calling. Luke also admits that he saw that the post was shut down almost immediately. He then says something curious. He wishes that there was a best way to deal with things like that, and even admits that, yes, there needs to be a legitimate discussion. And then he immediately assumes that it will become a discussion that devolves into slander. Slander is not slander if it's true and proven accurate. In the subreddit xLutheran, sources are provided. If it's an allegation, people come out and say it's an allegation. Otherwise, the subreddit is home to multiple links, different source types, including copies of emails sent. That's not slander. Let's remind ourselves what slander is. Slander, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is the action or crime of making a false spoken statement damaging to a person's reputation. Then Luke wraps up with an ending statement that is extremely humorous. He says he wishes the OP could have had the discussion about how challenging situations are handled, assuming he wanted a real discussion. Luke, when you made this post, you buried your invitation to talk to him at the very end of the post. You did not reach out to him via Facebook Messenger. At least, that's the assumption that I got while reading your post. And then not only did you bury your invitation to him to talk to you and to reach out regarding this at the end of your post, you also made it conditional, saying that he needs to comment down below if he's planning to reach out to you, or else you won't check your requests. Finally, OP was removed from this group. I don't know when that was, but it's completely possible that he could have missed this post. Wouldn't the Christian thing to do be reach out to him and offer a discussion with him, either in person or continue online? Until you've done the hard work of reaching out to a person multiple times to talk and to have a discussion, you cannot assume that they don't want a discussion. Only by them refusing to have a discussion with you multiple times can you then make the assumption that they don't want to have a discussion. Then to Luke's response is Daniel Baker's response. Daniel is apparently disturbed by the subreddit. He says that the modus operandi of the subreddit seems to be guilty until proven innocent. Well, Daniel, is it really guilty until proven innocent if there are links to pastors or called workers in general being convicted of various crimes? I know you say your preference is for things to be brought forward through the legal system, but that doesn't make members or ex-members posting links to stories saying that certain people are convicted because there was evidence found to convict those people any less legitimate. You are speaking nonsense, which I think is confirmed by his following line where it's saying anonymous accusations bereft of detail from third parties that seem intent on smearing the institution because of modern ideologies or whatever. That is rather bold of you to assume the ideologies or the beliefs of the people on the ex-Lutheran subreddit. And that is also definitely not taking their words and actions in the kindest possible way. Now that I'm done with the comments, let's go back and go through the post. Luke begins his post by saying, "These accounts being shared are shockingly disturbing." Yes, they are shockingly disturbing because of the position that called workers hold. There is a lot of authority and a lot of power involved. With that is assumed trust in those individuals because of the positions that they hold as called workers. Religious institution called workers, otherwise known in the secular realm as employees. It is rather shocking to us, regardless if we're in the religious realm or the secular realm, when we find out that called workers or employees who have power and authority over the rest of us, especially when it comes to children, have abused their positions. He then goes on to say that the wrongdoings were mishandled by the leaders of the institution and sometimes by the Synod itself. This is where it gets a little tricky, and I apologize in advance if it does not make sense. In my interviews with a few pastors, I've noticed that there is a tendency to describe church leadership, individual church leadership, as being relatively autonomous. Yes, they pay their dues to the WELS mothership, so to speak. But in general, by and large, they are meant to run themselves. Synod leadership is not supposed to get involved unless there is something drastically wrong going on there. Trying to get examples of specifically what would be room for them to step in versus continue ignoring what is going on at that church is difficult, as is determining what kind of punishment those called workers, regardless if they're pastors or teachers, would face if the accusations turned out to be true. Even to say it most charitably, the Synod is reluctant to get involved in the affairs of individual churches, arguably because both the church and the Synod leadership are WELS and are connected by WELS through the membership dues that they pay. They are both at fault, but that is my humble opinion. He then goes on to castigate the people who write about these accounts, saying that they're people who hate the Synod for one reason or another, in parentheses, clarifying perhaps valid, perhaps not. No, author, again, you are not taking their words and actions in the kindest possible way. These are not people who can be painted with a broad brush. Some of them do hate the WELS. Some of them don't hate the WELS. They were just hurt by it. Ultimately, you have a group of hurt and wounded individuals. If you were to truly take their words and actions in the kindest possible way, you would see them as a group of individuals who want to make sure that people who are still in the synod know about past transgressions and are carefully watching their called workers, especially pastors and teachers. He then goes on to say that these accounts slander the leadership of the WELS. It paints the leadership of the WELS with a broad brush. Well, Luke, if these accounts were not accurate or did not have so many pieces of evidence to support them, then maybe it wasn't a leadership problem. However, enough of these stories come up, and when people use their God-given abilities to do pattern recognition and recognize that the leadership consistently does certain actions in response to these allegations, it is not an individual church problem, it is a leadership problem. Luke says it is nearly impossible to properly respond to these accounts. That is you. That is not these people who are concerned for the lives and dignity of other people still in the WELS. He then goes on a diatribe about WELS, that your faith is not in WELS, you don't believe in WELS, etc., etc. I don't know anyone who ever thought that they were told to believe only in WELS or that all of their faith stemmed from the WELS. I do know that people who think of themselves as WELS automatically conflate leaving the WELS with leaving Christianity. I also know that people in the WELS tend to look on people who aren't in the WELS as, the best way I can put it, outsiders. That comment made by Luke really applies more to the WELS people still in the WELS, who acts as if WELS is everything and will be everything, religiously speaking. Then he says that you, meaning everyone who reads the post, know your brothers and sisters in your own congregation. The truth is that we think we know them, or we like to think that we know them, but we're not God, and we don't know what they are really thinking or feeling. We don't know if the cover that they're presenting to us is real, or if it is false, just to hide whatever dark secrets they have. He says that you can see what your church is teaching and doing. No, not everyone can see what their church is teaching and doing. For all the call meetings and board meetings that are, in general, said to be open to the public, there are meetings that church members don't know about. Meetings that are not talked about and are not put in the bulletin. Also, the attitude is the church leaders know best. People who challenge that assumption because of concerns like the ones you're talking about, Luke, are generally written off or told to keep quiet about their concerns because it could never happen here. Then Luke goes into the second part where he talks about how we are all sinners, which includes pastors and leaders. He says they will make mistakes, and he says they're required to give judgment on a situation. Notice here that he says they will make mistakes, but then leads into the next sentence where he's saying often they are required to make a judgment on a situation. The presumption here is that they are not capable of doing what they are accused of doing on the ex-Lutheran subreddit. That is a mistake, Luke. If they are sinners, then they are prone to the same darkness that resides in all of us, which includes making those bad decisions that is found on that, quote, disturbing, unquote, subreddit. He does admit that the churches can be naive and self-righteous, as well as have the attitude that I talked before about bad things happen there, but bad things could never happen in here. And he does admit that underestimating the power of temptation is a very real thing. He also says other good things, like out of ignorance or worse, laziness, institutions have not taken the steps needed to protect the vulnerable and remove the temptation to sin from people in positions of authority. All good stuff. Often leaders of organizations think first of protecting the institution rather than defending and healing the innocent. Also good remarks. He then ends that part by saying we cannot make excuses for sin. And I agree. And so does everyone else on the ex-Lutheran subreddit. Where he loses us is when he says that he doesn't think it's any bigger of a problem in the WELS compared to other denominations, and then offers a sentiment of prayer at the end. That's it? Just prayer? You're not encouraging any action to take place or leaders to be held accountable if they are being abusive? If all you're going to do is to offer to pray for the person and refer them to a website without offering any guidance on how to deal with the abusive person in front of them, that is negligence bordering on recklessness. For his third point, he says that the posts are almost all essentially gossip and slander. He says two interesting things. One is that gossip isn't necessarily false, and that slander hides in the gray areas, and that these accounts tell one side of a story in the most unfavorable way, which doesn't make the gossip or slander false, you'll note. It just means it's unfavorable, at least in his eyes. He also doesn't like that they're being shared on the internet because it's shared by people who don't know the situation and have no way of verifying its truth and no power or responsibility to do something about it. That's why it's being shared on the internet, so that people who have power and responsibility can do what they are supposed to do and look into these situations. The story that he shares of a personal story about a close friend who turned out to be gay, I find a little bit suspect. You cannot say that someone who comes out as gay cannot have a negative response to his supposedly Christian friends who have a negative reaction to him coming out. That would also be two sides of the story, would it not? The next paragraph where he's talking about saying that all these accounts are similarly false and asking how can you know, he then equates it to high school and bad things that happen at high schools. I find this section also very interesting because he uses a lot of vagueness when describing these bad things that happen, which is what he accuses the ex-Lutheran subreddit of doing. He then talks about the leaders in the synod. He says God has appointed leaders in our synod and that we have boards of appeals and they hear difficult cases to protect our called workers. Notice that he said, protect our called workers. I believe that was a slip of the tongue. Is their first objective truly to just protect the called worker? That could explain why all of these cases of abuse sound so similar. Notice also the emphasis on leaders in our synod. He does not mention outside authority. He does not mention police or judges or the criminal justice system when it comes to tough cases. No, everything should be dealt internally according to him. With this focus on synod leadership, he emphasizes that each of us individually needs to get personally involved with the church to make sure that the pastor is involved and that men of good faith and solid conscience are in these positions, and to encourage our leaders to make hard decisions. The thing is that you're assuming only good things will happen. The assumption is that as long as people are involved, only good people will be elected. Only good leaders will make good decisions. There are a lot of church boards that have a lot of dysfunction on them. There are favorites on the board. There are controlled opposition on the board. There's always at least a couple people on the board that are there because of how much they donate to the church, or because the pastor thinks that they're a good fit and the pastor basically cajoled them to get onto the board. Then you got basically the lifers who complain endlessly about being on the board but don't actually try to get off the board. Church boards are not perfect. Church leadership is not perfect. But I don't think Luke really has a good defense for it. The next part is the part that I discussed in regards to the comments, where he suggests that he couldn't believe the Reddit post that the user shared because everything was way too vague. He says that he's not going to call the original poster a liar, and then thinks that he is a she, despite the picture being very obviously, in my opinion, of a young Asian male. He then says that it sounds like something that she heard but didn't actually witness, using his words. Does that make a difference when people are bringing up their concerns? How can people be informed and truly be honest with each other if you're going to make that a subtle criteria for whether or not to discuss concerns? I say subtle criteria because even though he doesn't say it explicitly, to me personally, it seems that there's an implication that if you heard something versus witnessed something, then those concerns are going to be taken much less seriously, at least by him. Like I said before, he does offer to Jang Chen to discuss it in private, and then, in my opinion, gives a couple relatively ridiculous requests to OP. I mean, if you're going to really reach out to OP, try to Facebook message them directly. He then ends with saying that this page was partially started because of a poorly handled situation involving a called worker. I'm not sure what he's referring to because Luke doesn't even mention him by name, or her by name in case it's a female teacher. He then qualifies it by saying that that was okay because the situation was public and most of the people had direct knowledge and ways of verifying what was being said and done. My suspicion is that it is referring to the Pastor Ski situation with the Core and St. Peter Freedom and him sexually harassing his assistant as well as being an alcoholic back from 2011 to 2013, at least when that was being investigated by the Synod. The thing that he's missing here is that the people who heard about it or verified it did a lot of what he would have called in the earlier paragraphs of his post slander or gossip. When is it right, Luke, to gossip, aka to talk about factual things that people have evidence for? Him wondering if the admins should remove the post and then congratulating them essentially for turning off commenting because it will then drift away to obscurity. He offers his opinions to the admins and then he wishes peace to everybody. Me personally, I think he hopes it all drifts away to obscurity so that uncomfortable, hard topics don't have to be discussed. But that is just my personal opinion. What do you guys think? I want to thank you all for watching/listening. Please like, share, comment down below, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.